Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It sounds like Sherrone Moore, this Michigan football program, zeroing in on their next defensive line coach heading into that 2024 season. And that's Coach Greg Scruggs, the Wisconsin defensive line coach that when we talk about boxes that we want to see Michigan check with their assistant coach and position hires, Greg Scruggs checks a lot of those boxes. He's a young, energetic recruiter on the recruiting trail, but also has a phenomenal track record of developing defensive linemen, not only at his time at Wisconsin, but also going back to his time at Cincinnati as well. And for a little bit more gravy, was a player under Sherrone Moore when he was a GA and assistant coach at Louisville. And more importantly, from the state of Ohio, has extensive roots in that state. And we talk about this a lot. Michigan having a lot of recruiting battles in that state, in that region. That's always something, a box that you want to see checked for Michigan potential position coaches and assistants. Really excited to dive into Greg Scruggs, talk a little bit about what he brings to the table for this Michigan program. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. And many of you guys know, as a huge Michigan fan, it has been a wild last 2 weeks breaking down these coaching hires. The amount of support, the amount of feedback, the amount of input you guys have given has been absolutely amazing. We've had some phenomenal conversations in the comment section. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We will continue covering this coaching search and as Michigan fills out this coaching staff over the next couple weeks. So appreciate you guys rocking with it. Would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions in the comment section. And without further ado, let's get into Coach Scruggs and talk a little bit about his background first. And again, was a player at Louisville while Sherrone Moore was a graduate assistant and assistant coach at Louisville. So you kind of know that Sherrone Moore knows what Greg Scruggs is about, knows how he likes to operate, knows what he is like as a person, which is always a really good thing to know when you're going out and making these hires. But I want to focus on two things that we really talked about. And first, the young, energetic recruiters on the recruiting trail. One of the biggest questions that we had about the Wink Martindale hire at that defensive coordinator position was, can he get it going on the recruiting trail, right? Wink Martindale, as a mentor largely to guys like Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter, you feel really good about Wink Martindale coming into this Michigan program and continuing the dominance in the scheme and the schematics of this Michigan defense that we saw in 2021, 2022, and 2023. In that part, it's a very good hire. The only question you really have about Wink Martindale is, can he get it going on the recruiting trail? And part of the way you can mitigate some of those concerns is hiring really good recruiters around the defensive coordinator, assistants and position coaches that are really good at building relationships and getting these high schoolers to come to their program. And Greg Scruggs, in his short amount of time as being a defensive line coach, has really emerged as one of the top recruiters, not only during his time at Wisconsin, but his time at Cincinnati as well. You scroll down, take a look at some of the commitments that he's landed during his time as a defensive line coach. Ernest Willard Jr., a Michigan target from the state of Maryland in that 2024 class, kind of the crown jewel of that Wisconsin class in 2024, was the primary recruiter on. Many of you guys probably remember Mario Regino, four-star edge rusher coming out in that 2022 class, who was committed to Michigan, flips his commitment to Cincinnati. That was a massive target for Michigan, and Greg Scruggs played a role in landing him in that 2021 class. You look at Dylan Johnson, another really sought-after defensive lineman in that 2024 class. Dante Corleone, a guy that is an All-American defensive lineman at Cincinnati right now. You take a look at Greg Scruggs, what he's done on the recruiting trail, you can kind of get a sense that he is an emerging ace on the recruiting trail, and a guy that's young, has played in the NFL, has coached in the NFL with the New York Jets in 2022, a guy that definitely you feel comfortable about in terms of what he can do on the recruiting trail, especially being from the state of Ohio. And we talk about this a lot. Is it a must for your position coaches to be from Ohio and have those roots? No, absolutely not. But we all know it certainly helps. I mean, you are consistently going up against teams like Ohio State for top players in the state of Ohio. And when you have a position coach that played his high school football in Ohio, grew up in Ohio, has a lot of relationships with high school coaches in that area, that certainly helps Michigan and their chances at getting some of that top talent in the state of Ohio. Now, the next thing I want to kind of emphasize, and something that I feel it gets lost in the conversation. We talk so much about recruiting and what these coaches can do on the recruiting trail. what does it look like in terms of the player development for Greg Scruggs? And that's probably the most impressive thing that he brings to the table. You go back to his time at Cincinnati, started out as the director of player development in 2018 and 2019, then gets promoted to the defensive line coach in 2020 and 2021. And I mean, many college football fans know at Cincinnati, what they did during those years in terms of player development and competing with other massive Power 5 teams was phenomenal. I mean, Cincinnati was not an elite recruiting program, but what they were able to do is identify guys out of the high school ranks that they trust they can develop, get them into the program, and develop those guys. And Cincinnati was consistently a top 10 team in college football, while Greg Scruggs was the coach, a defensive line coach and player development coach at Cincinnati. And so the track record of what he did specifically along the line of scrimmage for that Cincinnati team is extremely impressive. And then he goes to Wisconsin. They put out a top 40 defense first year under Luke Fickle in the Big Ten. Greg Scruggs has a very impressive developmental background as a defensive line coach. And another thing that you really trust here is Luke Fickle. In my mind, I have a ton of respect for Luke Fickle, and not only what he does at running a program, but what he does hiring coaches around him. And the fact that Greg Scruggs starts off as a player development coach, gets promoted to the defensive line coach during Luke Fickle's tenure at Cincinnati, goes to the New York Jets in 2022. And then when Luke Fickle gets the job at Wisconsin, he goes out. One of the first things he does is hire Greg Scruggs to come in and coach the defensive line for Wisconsin. What does that tell you? Luke Fickle, the guy that Greg Scruggs has worked for the last 7 years, Luke Fickle loves him. Luke Fickle trusts him. Luke Fickle is a massive fan of Greg Scruggs. And we all trust Luke Fickle in terms of what he does, in terms of evaluating the coaches around him. That is a massive plus in my mind in terms of evaluating Greg Scruggs as a position coach at that defensive line position. And I think this would be a massive hire. And again, there's really two boxes that you want to see Michigan check in terms of hiring these position coaches. One, can they get it done on the recruiting trail? A question that I think is emphasized with the Wink Martindale hire. Then Greg Scruggs certainly checks that box. But then the second question you're looking for is, are they still good coaches? Are they still good position coaches that can develop talent? Greg Scruggs has been phenomenal in that department. And so with those two boxes massively checked, with Sherrone Moore having experience with Greg Scruggs as a person and player at Louisville during that 2010 and 2011 year, I mean, those are really encouraging signs in terms of what Greg Scruggs can do as that defensive line coach for Michigan in 2024. And again, similar conversation that we had for the defensive backs coach. This is an extremely attractive job. You are stepping in and you are working with guys like Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore. This is a defensive line that if you're a defensive line coach, you can walk into the building and you are gifted multiple all Big Ten guys on that defensive line and a ton of talent that's coming up that can get developed and has a really bright future. So Greg Scruggs coming to Michigan would be absolutely massive. Last thing I want to talk about, culture. When you see the rumors and the buzz around Greg Scruggs taking this job at Michigan, you see the Wisconsin defensive linemen tweeting out. I mean, not like they're angry, but they're upset that Greg Scruggs is leaving because they like him and they have a lot of respect for him and they love playing for him. And I think that's another massive sign in terms of, do your players like playing for you? Greg Scruggs certainly seems to have that box checked as well. I'm a massive fan. I would love to see this get finalized in the next coming days. We'll continue to cover it as it plays out. But Greg Scruggs, potentially the next Michigan defensive line coach. I think a lot of Michigan fans can be really excited about this hire. We'll continue to cover it as it plays out. Just wanted to hop on, give you guys some of my takes on it. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas again. The amount of support from the Michigan fans has been absolutely phenomenal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.